They thought I was still the quiet, unwanted daughter they could bully into giving everything back. But when I walked into that courtroom, even the judge froze. What they didn't know was, I was never just the girl they left behind. This is Her Retaliation. Subscribe, because this story isn't just about inheritance. It's about justice finally catching up. I never thought a courtroom could feel colder than the childhood home I grew up in, but that morning, it did. I could feel the air conditioning biting into my skin as I sat there, waiting for the judge to appear. My parents were across the aisle, whispering with their attorney, glancing at me like I was a stranger who'd stolen something sacred. That part wasn't new. They'd been looking at me like that my whole life. My name is Madison Blake, and I grew up in a house that never really felt like one. My parents had me when they were barely 20, and for as long as I can remember, they treated me like a mistake they couldn't return. My father, Robert, had a good job in construction management, and my mother, Elaine, taught elementary school. To the world, we were a picture of small-town normalcy. Behind closed doors, I was a reminder of everything they thought they'd lost. They had another daughter when I was 7, their real child, as they liked to say when they thought I wasn't listening. Lily is so much more like us. Mom would sigh, like genetics was a curse I'd somehow broken. Madison's different. Different became the word they used instead of unwanted. I learned early not to ask for much, but there was one person who saw me, my grandmother, Vivian Blake, my dad's mother. She was everything they weren't, sharp, elegant, the kind of woman who could command a room without raising her voice. She'd been widowed young and built her own fortune through real estate and stock investments, quietly becoming one of the wealthiest women in our state. She took a liking to me when I was 9. You're not like them. She'd say, sipping her black coffee and studying me over the rim of the cup. You listen, you think before you speak, that's rare. She started taking me with her to property visits, to meetings, to art galleries. She said she wanted to show me how people with power behaved. To a lonely kid, it felt like sunlight. My parents hated it. Every time she picked me up, my mom's smile was paper. Then, don't spoil her, Vivian, she'd say through clenched teeth. She's already got an attitude. Vivian would just glance at her and reply, maybe if you stopped trying to break her spirit, she wouldn't need me to remind her she has one. That silence that followed those words, it was always delicious. Over the years, my grandmother became my closest confidant. She was tough. She never said she loved me in a flowery way, but she showed it in how she taught me to be self-reliant. She made me learn how to read contracts, understand credit, and even negotiate. She said, never let anyone tell you family loyalty means financial submission. When she got sick in her late 70s, my parents suddenly became affectionate again toward her, at least. They called her daily, dropped off groceries she never asked for, and made sure to mention how grateful they were for her support. I knew what they were doing. Vivian did too. One evening, she called me to her home. She was weaker then, sitting on her balcony wrapped in a blanket. Madison, she said, her voice slow but deliberate, I know what's going to happen when I'm gone. They'll circle like vultures. Don't let them tear you apart. I remember laughing nervously. Grandma, you make it sound like a war. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Oh, honey, it will be. When she passed, it was quiet, peaceful. She'd made sure of that. Even her final moments felt intentional. What wasn't quiet was what came after. Her lawyer called me 2 weeks later, asking me to come to his office for a reading of the will. I expected maybe a few sentimental items, maybe her old piano or some jewelry. Instead, when he opened the envelope, the words hit me like a punch. She had left everything, the house, the properties, the trust, and nearly $3 million to me. Not a cent to my father or mother. Not even to Lily. I remember sitting there in stunned silence, my hands trembling. There must be some mistake, I murmured. There isn't. The lawyer said gently, your grandmother was very specific. She said, and I quote, Madison is the only one who understands the value of what I built. For the first time in my life, I cried not from pain, but from feeling seen. My parents, however, didn't cry. They screamed. When they found out, my father stormed into my apartment, red, faced, and shaking. You manipulated her, he shouted. You turned her against us, Dad. She made her own decision. I said, trying to keep my voice even. She was old. You used her. She was lucid. I shot back. She had every test and document signed off by her doctors. He wasn't listening. He left with a threat hanging in the air. You'll regret this. And he meant it. 2 months later, I was served with papers. My parents were suing me for inheritance fraud and emotional manipulation of a vulnerable adult. They were claiming that I coerced Vivian into cutting them out of the will. I remember sitting on my couch, the papers trembling in my hands, reading the words over and over. It felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. I'd spent years trying to earn their love, and now, They were dragging me into court to strip me of the one thing that proved I was worth something. When I called their lawyer to confirm it wasn't a mistake, he said in a clipped tone, "They believe this is what she would have wanted. No, this was what they had always wanted, control. But this time, they weren't dealing with the little girl they used to belittle. They were dealing with the woman Vivian Blake had trained." I hired an attorney, Eleanor Finch, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had handled complex estate cases before. When I told her everything, she just leaned back and said, "Good, let's make them regret this." The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, witness lists, and discovery filings. My parents' legal team tried every trick questioning Vivian's mental capacity, digging up emails between us, twisting affectionate messages into manipulative ones. But what they didn't know was that Grandma Vivian had been meticulous. Every will update had been done in the presence of 2 witnesses, notarized and backed by a video recording of her reading her wishes out loud. When we submitted that footage into evidence, my father's attorney went pale. Still, the emotional toll was brutal. The depositions, the gossip from extended family, the cold stares in grocery stores small. Town America thrives on scandal, and I had become the headline. One night, while sorting through files, I found something in one of Grandma's old lockboxes. A sealed envelope with my name written on it. Inside was a letter in her looping cursive. "If they ever try to destroy you for what I've given, remember, the truth will always be your greatest ally. They'll come armed with lies, but you'll have proof. And if you ever doubt yourself, know this: I left you everything because you are the only one who earned it." I held that letter for hours, her words burning into me like armor. By the time the court date arrived, I was no longer scared. I was ready. When I walked into that courtroom, my parents were already seated, dressed like saints in mourning. My mother rolled her eyes as I took my place. I could hear her whisper to my father. She actually showed up. The judge entered, an older man with sharp features and tired eyes. As the clerk began reading the charges, something changed in his face. He looked down at the papers, then up at me, and his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said slowly, looking toward my parents' side. "The charges are against her." My father straightened. "Yes, Your Honor, we believe," but the judge interrupted, glancing back at me. "Miss Blake, are you Madison Vivian Blake?" "Yes, sir." The courtroom went silent. He leaned back, visibly surprised. "You're Vivian Blake's granddaughter?" "Yes." A pause, then a faint smile crossed his face. Well, this just got interesting. The look on my parents' faces was priceless confusion, then discomfort. They hadn't realized the judge had personally known my grandmother. He turned to their lawyer. "I knew Mrs. Blake for 30 years. She was one of the most clear-minded, sharp-tongued women I ever met. I find it hard to believe she could be manipulated by anyone, let alone her granddaughter." That was the first moment the power shifted. My mom's smirk faded. My father's jaw tightened, and I sat there calm, steady, feeling my grandmother's voice echo in my mind. "They'll come armed with lies, but you'll have proof." This was only the beginning. Because what they didn't know yet, what would change everything, was that Vivian had left more than money. She'd left a plan that was about to unravel everything they thought they could steal from me. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against my window. For a brief second, I forgot everything: the lawsuit, the betrayal, the endless ache behind my ribs. Then my phone buzzed, and reality snapped back like a rubber band. Another email from my parents' lawyer, marked urgent. I didn't even open it. I just stared at the notification and whispered to myself, "They really want to bury me, don't they?" For years, I had lived my life pretending their words didn't matter. "You're not really family." My father would sneer whenever I did something he didn't approve of. My mother didn't even bother to hide her contempt. She would just roll her eyes and tell people I was from the other side, as if I were some outsider crashing her perfect little world. But now, in death, my grandmother had given me something none of them could ever take away: legitimacy. Her last will and testament made it crystal clear: everything she owned belonged to me. The penthouse in Manhattan, the vineyard in Napa, the trust accounts, all of it. I didn't want their money, I wanted peace, but peace was the last thing they'd allow me. When I finally walked into the courthouse that morning, the air felt sharp and cold, like the beginning of a storm. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I passed through the metal detector. I could feel eyes on me, not just from my parents, but from their attorney, a smug man named Richard Keller, who had been their family lawyer for decades. He smiled thinly when he saw me. "Miss Blake," he said, drawing out the syllables, "quite a situation you've created for yourself." I met his gaze evenly. "No, Mr. Keller. It's a situation they created for me years ago. I'm just done cleaning up after it." Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to choke on. My mother sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a pearl necklace I recognized from my grandmother's jewelry box. She'd taken it before the estate was even settled. My father leaned back beside her, arms crossed, his smirk full of arrogance and false confidence. Then the judge entered. He was older, dignified, with the kind of expression that could cut through noise. "Case number 3148, Blake vs. Blake," he announced. "Estate inheritance dispute, all parties present." "Present, Your Honor," Keller said smoothly. "Present," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. The judge flipped through the documents, then stopped. His brow furrowed. "Wait." He looked directly at my parents. "These charges there against your daughter." My mother rolled her eyes. "She's not really." He cut her off sharply. "She's your legal daughter, is she not? Adopted at 6 months, with a valid certificate issued by the state of New York." Silence. I watched as color drained from her face. She hadn't expected that detail to be raised so soon. But I had my attorney, a calm, sharp woman named Laura Pierce, stood. "Your Honor, if I may, the plaintiffs have based their entire claim on the argument that my client is not entitled to her inheritance because she is not biologically related. However, according to both federal and state law, adopted children hold equal rights in matters of inheritance, unless otherwise stated in the will." The judge adjusted his glasses. "And was there such a clause?" "No, Your Honor," Laura replied, handing him the signed and notarized copy. "In fact, the decedent specifically referred to Miss Blake as my granddaughter, my only heir." I could almost hear my mother's nails tapping the table in frustration. My father muttered something under his breath. The judge looked unimpressed. "This case seems baseless," he said. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve here, Mr. and Mrs. Blake?" My father tried to charm his way out of it, smiling like a politician. "Your Honor, we simply want fairness. Our mother, her grandmother," the judge corrected, "wasn't of sound mind when she wrote the will." Laura stepped forward again, sliding another document across the table. "Then perhaps you can explain why both psychiatrists who evaluated her independently confirmed her mental fitness less than 2 months before her passing." My father froze. The judge exhaled through his nose. "I see." It was the first moment I'd felt power shift in the room. For the first time, they were on the defensive, but I wasn't done. I had one more card to play, something my grandmother had told me privately, something that could shatter their entire pretense of innocence. When court adjourned for lunch, I didn't speak to them. I walked out alone, breathing in the crisp air, my mind replaying the last day I'd seen my grandmother alive. "Madison," she'd said softly, her hand trembling as she reached for mine. "There's something you need to know about your parents, and about the family trust. Promise me you'll open the letter I left in the safe. Don't show it until the right time." That time was coming. As I stood outside the courthouse, I pulled the small silver key from my necklace, the one she'd given me before she died. It was more than a keepsake. It was access to the truth. I could almost feel her presence in the breeze that whipped across my face. And I whispered, "Don't worry, Grandma. They won't get away with it this time." Then I turned and went back inside, ready to end this battle once and for all. The courtroom was packed the next morning, buzzing with the kind of tension you could almost touch. Local reporters had caught wind of the case, curious about the family drama involving a millionaire grandmother's estate. I could feel the weight of every stare as I walked in, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My parents were already seated, whispering to their attorney, projecting a false calm. I had never felt so alive, Your Honor. Laura Pierce began, standing confidently. "Before we proceed with the plaintiff's arguments, we would like to submit additional evidence regarding the decedent's intentions." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Go on." I stepped forward and placed the envelope from my grandmother on the evidence table. My hands were steady, my voice calm. "Your Honor, this letter was left to me by Vivian Blake, along with supporting documentation stored in her safe. It details her reasons for naming me as her sole heir and confirms her awareness and consent throughout the process." The judge opened the envelope, flipping through the pages. His eyes widened slightly as he read. A hush fell over the courtroom. I could see my parents' mouths open, searching for words that didn't exist. The letter contained detailed notes, financial ledgers, personal commentary about my parents' entitlement, and even a recorded statement confirming her mental clarity. Vivian had anticipated their legal attacks and left a paper trail airtight enough to withstand the most aggressive challenges. Laura turned to the judge. "Your Honor, as you can see, Mrs. Blake was fully competent and deliberate in her decisions. The plaintiff's claims are entirely without merit." My father lunged to speak, his voice trembling with desperation. "Objection. That letter, it could have been coerced. It's inadmissible." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Blake, any allegations must be backed with evidence. As it stands, you have none." I could see the fury building in my mother's eyes. She tried to interject, her tone sharper. "Your Honor, we raised concerns about undue influence. The granddaughter lived in the house. She cared for her, yes." The judge interrupted. "But care does not equal coercion. The letter's content, combined with corroborating witnesses, proves she acted independently. Case law supports this." Then came the final blow. Laura called my grandmother's trusted lawyer to the stand, the same man who had read the will aloud. He testified clearly and firmly. Mrs. Blake explicitly instructed that Madison was to inherit all assets. She specified no one else, and she confirmed this in person multiple times. There is no evidence of coercion. The courtroom was silent. My parents' faces were pale, their false confidence crumbling. I could see the panic in my mother's eyes as she whispered something to my father, probably a plea for some last shred of control. And then Laura laid out the most devastating part, the hidden clause my grandmother had included in the trust. It was a clause my parents had never anticipated. If any party challenged the will unsuccessfully, they would forfeit any claim to future inheritances and be responsible for all legal fees. The judge paused, looking from the clause to my parents. "Do you understand the implications of this?" They nodded numbly, but it was clear they hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of what was coming. "The plaintiff's claims are dismissed in full," he continued. "Furthermore, in accordance with the trust's provisions, the plaintiffs are liable for all legal costs incurred by the defendant. The court finds in favor of Madison Blake." I felt a calm satisfaction wash over me. No gloating, no harsh words, just the quiet, undeniable triumph of justice. My parents slumped in their seats, speechless. For once, their superiority complex had been stripped away, replaced with raw humiliation. The courtroom murmured with the weight of the verdict, and I finally allowed myself a small, private smile. After the ruling, reporters surrounded me, asking how it felt to inherit everything. I simply said, "I did what I needed to do. My grandmother trusted me to handle her estate responsibly, and I did." Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. The storm had passed. The battles, the threats, the endless whispers about my place, in the family, all of it resolved, not through anger, not through cruelty, but through preparation, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. Over the following months, I took steps to ensure my grandmother's legacy was protected. I worked with lawyers to set up trusts, managed properties responsibly, and even helped some distant relatives financially, but only those who respected the boundaries my grandmother had envisioned. My parents, however, remained distant, their arrogance permanently tempered by the law's impartial hand. Sitting in my office looking over a vineyard acquisition report, I reflected on how much I had grown. I had transformed from the overlooked, underestimated child into a woman who